Welcome to the My Fractional CEO Thought Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future of leadership, biotech, innovation. Today, we're diving into green biotech, one of the most promising investment areas in the coming decade. Joining me today is Yves Decadt, a dear member of My Fractional CEO and a visionary leader who has built and scaled multiple biotech ventures. In this episode, we'll explore why green biotech is more than just a trend, where the real investment opportunities lie, and how innovation in this space is shaping the future. So let's jump right in. Yves, thank you for joining me today. When did you realize that green biotech wasn't just another trend, but a major investment opportunity?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. Green biotech is certainly a passing trend. It's really like a fundamental shift in how we produce food, how agriculture is done, how we produce materials, and so on. And so there's actually two things that shifted my mind in this field. First of all, during the past decade, sustainability became a big thing in all sectors, and so that has been a shift. And then secondly, in the biotech itself, we saw some big shifts with new technologies coming up, like CRISPRs, which allows gene editing in all kinds of products. And this allows, for instance, to have drought-resistant crops, pest-resistant crops, and so on. And it's these two things coming together that make the change. So it's on one hand, let's say, the change towards sustainable industries in general, and on the other hand, some fundamental shift in the biotech itself. And it's the intersection of the two that makes the green biotech, and that really makes the shift in green biotech and why it is so interesting at the moment. Yeah, maybe I should add one more thing when I talk about green biotech. Actually, when we talk about biotech, most people think about red biotech, which is the so-called healthcare biotech to produce new medicines. But there is indeed also blue biotech, which is the marine biotech. There's also gray biotech, which is more like industrial biotech, like water purification and so on. And then green biotech, which is more in the field of sustainability, and that's what we're talking about.
That's fantastic, because biotech, a lot of people think of biotech and immediately, as you said, they think about drug and pharma and so on. And there's a lot more. And certainly green biotech will impact the sustainability of each one of those, but also be a major investment opportunity and differentiator. From your experience, what's the most transformative green biotech project you've worked or you know about, and what made it successful, in your opinion?
Yeah, my experience with biotech, I'm doing biotech my whole life, by means of speaking, but mostly in the red biotech, so the pharmaceutical and healthcare biotech. But I've always been interested in the green biotech space. And there are two projects I've become involved in recently. One is with a company that produced biomaterials. So actually, most of the plastics at this moment are produced by fossil oil, from fossil oil in some way. And now several companies are working on so-called bioplastics, and these are made from biological materials. For instance, the company that I'm working with is making these bioplastics from plant oils. So instead of fossil oils, they ferment plant oils, and then you get like a kind of bioplastic material, which you then can make into bottles, which can be used for beverages like water. It may be personal care products, or it may be cosmetics and so on. So that's a very interesting project that I'm working on and involved in. And another initiative I'm involved in is to work with some investors to really create a green biotech fund that really invests in all the things that we're talking about. And of course, by focusing on that, I'll learn a lot about potential opportunities and where to go and so on.
That experience, including in building the fund, is really very differentiator, because in order for you to build a fund, you need to understand all the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes with something like a red or a green or a blue biotech. And I imagine that green biotech faces heavy regulation challenges. Can you share some of those challenges and sometime where the regulation almost killed an invention and how you navigated through it? Basically, what do you think are going to be this heavy regulation elements, and how can we improve in order to really achieve the true potential of green biotech?
Yes, that's a very good and important question. Yeah, if people think about technology, mostly they think about IT and everything happening with AI and so on. But what you have to realize that in the IT world, everything goes very quickly. You can iterate quickly. Regulations are actually not very strong. For instance, AI regulations are very recent and coming up, and people are, let's say, against regulations almost. If you think about biotech, mostly people think about green biotech, red biotech. So in healthcare, and healthcare is a very strongly regulated sector. And so that happens also in green biotech. So it is, unfortunately, or good, I mean, it's for a reason, but it's still very strongly regulated. And one example there is let's say, the gene-edited crops. They were allowed in US already earlier, but actually in Europe, they were classified under the same laws as GMOs, genetically modified organisms. And that was really a huge setback for researchers, for startups, and so on. So what could they do about it? I mean, the first thing that some startups did, being creative, with a nice word, we could say they strategically expanded to other regions. They fled from Europe, by means of speaking, and went in countries like US, Brazil, Japan, and so on, that actually allowed them to develop the products more freely. Other startups were also very creative. They tried to actually explore other technologies. For instance, working on microbial solutions, on biochemical solutions to reach the same effects. But all of this, I mean, that make some put some things in motion actually in Europe. So we have seen a shift there, and European Commission is actually re-evaluating its stance on gene-edited crops. I mean, by reacting, by adapting, the biotech companies are actually able to move the needle a bit also on part of the regulation.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something very important, is because sometimes it's not only the regulation, but to which existing regulation it gets clumped in together. You mentioned the considered GMO. And so that is another one of the challenges. And green biotech requires a lot of collaboration between scientists, investors, and policymakers. How do you align all these forces to drive success? You, as you said, building a fund specifically for this areas, what are your major concerns, and what would be your recommendation in order to make all of these forces align?
Yeah, that's again the very important question. Researchers and so on, everybody, politicians have to work in their own field and used to work in silos. But with a complex thing like biotech, whether it's green biotech, red biotech, it doesn't really work. And everybody speaks its own language, but in some way we have to communicate with each other. So how can we do that? Especially for startups, you know, if they want to attract investors, it's very important to speak the language of the different things. So for biotech has to speak the language of the investors, translate what they're doing in terms of science into, let's say, business metrics and into net present value and other metrics. But same, I mean, you have to talk to the regulators to help them actually developing the regulation and proactive actually, and also, let's say, getting a bit of fear out of it, yeah, rather than talking about GMOs and everybody says yes. People have to realize that, for instance, insulin, a product in the red biotech space, has been produced by fermentation forever by means of speaking, and no one talks about it, and we take it. And so scientists, of course, they like to be in their lab and look at the microscopes by means of speaking, but they also have to be open and talk to industry partners. So it requires some effort from everybody to listen to the other and try to understand and learn the other languages. Yeah? And so one great way to do that, and have some experience also with that in the red biotech area, is actually creating public-private partnerships. So we're really, sometimes it's a three-party collaboration between one or two small or large companies. Then there might be a big fund like the Bill Gates Foundation also, which invests in these things, and the government. So this is a real way to work together. And when you work together, you actually make progress.
As you say, is about getting each of those members outside of their comfort zone. Sometimes people, and this applies to business leaders, scientists, politicians, is they forget that not everybody has the same level of knowledge and understanding of their field as they do. So taking a step back and working in collaboration. I loved your example of public-private partnerships, but it's about creating working groups in order to ensure that everybody is talking the same language. But you mentioned also regarding to insulin and so on, do you think there is something around education also that needs to adapt? Because in a lot of cases, we talk to scientists, they are brilliant, but they are really hard in bringing those concepts down and dumbifying and making it for non-scientists. Do you think that is one of the challenges? How do we bridge that gap?
There's indeed an important role for education. And if we talk about education in this context, not about just education of the young people. It's about, let's say, when we talk about biotech, we have to explain that biotech is with us since already thousands of years. I mean, the first element of biotech was producing wine and beer. The Egyptians already were doing that like 5,000 years ago. And then talking about examples like that, again, the insulin was also one of the first fermented products that we actually took. So education, not only of let's say, the youngsters, but also the broad public, that biotech is with us for a long time, will stay with us for a long time, and is nothing dangerous on itself. It's part of the education. But then it's also about education and more specialized way. Let's say education also of the regulators. There's a company like Upside Foods. They make lab-grown meat in United States. And what they did was very smart. They worked with the FDA directly together long before the product came to the market. And so in a certain way, they educated the FDA, the Food and Drug Association in the US, and they actually not only worked with them together, but shaped also the regulatory framework. So instead of waiting and being imposed something and then experiencing as a hurdle, we talked about regulatory hurdles before, but if you work with the FDA, with the regulator, and try to educate them and then explain them what you do, you actually shape the regulation, and both parties work together on something that they're happy with.
It's that collaboration. The earlier the collaboration starts to happen, and let's call it demystification of the concepts, because as you said, everybody talks about biotech independently if it's blue, green, red, and they always, maybe because of CRISP or some others, they think about genetically modifying or something unnatural. But then, as you said, things like wine, beers, and insulin, they are things that have been with us for a long time. They are also part of biotech. This demystification of the biotech is a very important piece in order to enable that collaboration. But as you said, also starting early with the regulator, not seeing them as the blocker, but actually helping them on this education journey in order to understand this is what it is, this is why we're trying to do this, this is how the outcomes are. Is this what you're suggesting that they should focus more as startups and even large companies?
Yes, correct. I mean, education is not about going to university or schools. It's about really explaining in simple terms what you're doing. And I think in biotech, which is actually from a scientific perspective rather complicated, but it can be explained in simple ways by giving examples like I did, so that people don't have to be afraid about it.
Sometimes there is some advancements in science that kind of, even though it was a great advancement, they get a negative impact on some people's brains. Like, for example, the cloning that happened, the cloning of a sheep and everything. And so there is always an education hurdle. And as you say, it's not going to university, is being open and honest about what it is and what it isn't that you're doing in order to simplify that. Because if not, people tend to remember the bad things pretty well. And then when they don't know, they go to those traumas and those things that they've felt in the past. In terms of now, fast forwarding 10 years, where do you see green biotech playing its biggest role? Is there a specific area? Do you see the same lessons that we're learning with green biotech going to other types of the biotech? Where do you see it playing the biggest role?
There are a number of areas. I'll just highlight some. I mean, the first is climate, of course. Currently, for instance, agriculture, energy sector is looked at very negative in terms of producing CO2 or methane. Actually, agriculture contributes to a very large part of greenhouse emissions, for instance. But it might be that with all the new technologies coming up, that these farms, instead of producing CO2, they may actually evolve into carbon sinks, like, let's say, absorbing CO2. And there are already some examples that there are companies working on engineered plants that absorb and store CO2 more than traditionally. So there's a company called Living Carbon, and they're actually working on trees that grow faster and actually store more carbon. Yeah, so that's what biotech can do in a good way. Of course, then fossil fuels are also creating a lot of CO2 in the world, but we might create with biotech biofuels, which are bio-based and also, let's say, biomaterials. Think about, for instance, again, I gave the example of packaging materials made from plant oil, but also, for instance, there's packaging materials based on fungi, for instance. There's fuel based on algae from the sea. That's all very interesting examples where we can replace the origins like fossil fuels or animals, actually. Yeah. There are other examples in agriculture also where we can actually produce some feed additives that make sure that actually the cows, for instance, that they create less methane. Yeah. So all kinds of things in this whole value chain and the whole food chain, in the whole material chain, the whole fuel chain, biotech can play into several areas, and in that way contribute actually to reduce carbon and maybe even to absorb carbon in some way.
I'm a strong believer in that too. I think even when people talk about other options to the fossil fuels that we use today, there is hydrogen, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and so on. All of this is possible because of the biotech and all the science that goes in behind that. So I absolutely agree, is one of the key elements for the future is this learning, this education will unlock a lot better options for the future. But there's always, and what I wanted to ask is, there is always the skepticism about, oh, but it's genetically modified, the cows not to release as much methane and so on. How do you think about that balance? Is there something that you already face? Because I imagine in Red Biotech, you face similar things. So is there any trick or any recommendation that you do in order to help go over that challenge, educational challenge?
Yeah, I think one thing is carbon. It's a gas. It's something we don't see, and it's very strange to talk about it. I think one area where we will see a lot of progress also in the next 10 years is sustainable materials. We will see a lot of, let's say, biomaterials going. So bioplastics, biotextiles, so that are biochemically fermented or whatever instead of chemically synthesized. And people will be able to touch these things. So it will become much more tangible. And I gave the example, for instance, of bioplastics to make it could be your drinking bottle. It looks like a normal plastic bottle from fossil oil, but it will be made from a bioplastic. So if people touched it and used it, if they drink water from it, they will get used to it. I think that will help. There are some companies work on, let's say, lab-grown cotton, lab-grown leather. I mean, if we start getting used to materials like this, we will be less afraid from it in a certain way.
It's the typical fear of change. And going forward, and for investors or founders considering green biotech today, what's the smartest move they can make right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Also, it's not really up to me to say what's the smartest move for investors, but I know what I would do. I mean, if you see all these changes happening in parallel in the green biotech area, I mean, it's important to think long term, but really act now in a certain way. So if I was an investor with the fund, I would really look at so what technologies are really scalable, that are also very innovative, with a certain thing also. It has to solve a major global problem. I think it's started working on, for instance, food security, reducing carbon emissions, using fermentation to let's say, produce meat replacement products, to biomaterials. I mean, these are really high growth sectors, yeah, because they really solve a major problem. So that's some interesting thing to focus on. But then another thing to look at, I mean, is there really like a clear path to the market? Yeah, I mean, many startups tend to focus a bit too much on the science, but you also have to have a roadmap to bringing your product on the market. So that's something important. And as we have seen before, working with other parties like public-private funds is something that's also very interesting for investors and the startups also. But we see also in general that VCs are investing in it. And the companies like Living Carbon, I talked about that company before. They have trees that grow faster and stock more carbon. They actually attract a lot of money from VC. So it is happening already. So that's the investor side. But of course, we have the founder side also. If you are a young biotech, I mean, it's important to try to speak the language of the other parties, as we have seen, the language of the regulators. And the best practice is probably to involve the regulators early. Yeah, don't wait until the approval roadblocks come, but work with them, shape the policies, and actually collaborate with them. Yeah, educate them in a certain way. And then, of course, it's very important also to have a roadmap to the final product on the market. Yeah, because it's easy to make a product on lab scale, to make lab grown meat, but then how are you going to do this in a kind of commercially viable way in the future? Yeah? So you need to provide an answer for that in the beginning. So overall, I think if we look again 10 years ahead, this is really like a tsunami coming. I mean, this will reshape agriculture. It will reshape the materials. It will reshape climate. So again, to your question, what is a smarter move today? I think investors should be ready to position themselves in this ecosystem, but also founders and so on, because the main companies, the key companies are being built now. So now is the moment to get in.
That's a fantastic ending, because as I understood, is about for the founders start with defining why you're in business and start partnering, collaborating early, speak the language, because there is a lot of interest in the future. You just need to go and try to connect. Why are you building? What is the market? And what's your goal? And when you do this, then they will be building the next multi-billion-dollar company for the future, because as you say, the tsunami is here. It's happening now.
Yeah, correct. That's a good way to end this call and this discussion.
Fantastic. This has been an incredible conversation with you, Yves. Green tech is clearly one of the most exciting spaces to watch. If you enjoyed today's discussion, make sure you follow, connect on LinkedIn, share this episode. I would like to end with Yves. Where can people find you if they want to continue this conversation with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, of course, and send me an email or get a chat. I'm happy to talk to many people and learn from you, but also explain more about what I think about this future and what this technology is going to bring.
Thank you very much, Yves. Thank you for joining us today. Fantastic to learn from your views on green tech, and look forward to learning more in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.